Okay, so I'm going to be talking about this first objective, summarize Descartes' argument that ends with the claim, I think, therefore I am. And so Rene Descartes, these are his years. He's born in 1596, died in 1650. And this argument, I think, therefore I am, or the argument that ends with that claim, that phrase, I think, therefore I am, comes from his work Discourse on, this is the full name of it, Discourse on the Method for Conducting, for conducting one's reason well and for seeking the truth in the sciences. That's also sometimes abbreviated just as Discourse on Method. And then Meditations on First Philosophy. And if you've heard the term Cartesian, that refers to Descartes. So Cartesian dualism, Cartesian doubt, that it's referring to Descartes. And then you may hear cogito or cogito ergo sum. Cogito ergo sum is just the Latin, I think, therefore I am. And we also abbreviate the whole argument as the cogito argument, or we can just say, oh yeah, Descartes' cogito. And that's just abbreviation for cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. So just some background information to feel comfortable or not intimidated by Descartes. So this argument starts with this radical doubt that Descartes' going to undertake, also called Cartesian doubt, where he's going to doubt everything he knows, try systematically to doubt everything he knows in order to get to a more sure foundation for knowledge. And I'm taking excerpts from Meditation on First Philosophy and Discourse on Method, and I'm just going to read some passages that highlight his basic argument, and then I'll summarize it all at the end, and hopefully everyone feels comfortable and confident with this. Okay, so this is from Meditations on First Philosophy. Several years have now elapsed since I first became aware that, and the bolding is my bolding, so I'm just trying to highlight here some of the important plot points that Descartes' making. So several years have now elapsed since I first became aware that I had accepted, even from my youth, many false opinions for true, and that consequently what I afterward based on such principles was highly doubtful. And from that time, I was convinced of the necessity of undertaking once in my life to rid myself of all the opinions I had adopted, and of commencing anew the work of building from the foundation, if I desired to establish a firm and abiding superstructure in the sciences. So he's going to doubt everything. So he says, hey, I have all these beliefs that aren't true, or I have all these things that I thought I knew, and it turns out I didn't know them. They had faulty foundations. I need to get to a sure foundation. So it will not be necessary for me to show that the whole of these are false, a point perhaps which I shall never reach. But as even now my reason convinces me that I ought not the less carefully to withhold belief from what is not entirely certain and indubitable than from what is manifestly false, it will be sufficient to justify the rejection of the whole if I shall find in each some ground for doubt. Nor for this purpose will it be necessary even to deal with each belief individually, which would be truly an endless labor, but as the removal from below of the foundation necessarily involves the downfall of the whole edifice, I will at once approach the criticism of the principles on which all my former beliefs rested. So he's going to say, I just need any reason to doubt it, to doubt whatever it is. And I want to doubt the foundations of whatever belief or knowledge I thought I had, so that I can get rid of the most beliefs possible, the most dubitable beliefs possible. Okay, after that, I have up to this moment accepted as possessed of the highest truth and certainty I received either from or through the senses. So he's saying, up until now, the things that I'm most sure about, I got those from my senses. And then he continues, I observed, however, that these sometimes misled us. And it is the part of prudence not to place absolute confidence in that by which we have even once been deceived. So he's saying, hey, if my senses ever deceived me, I'm never going to trust my senses. And then I added this, but surely sometimes our senses are reliable. So for example, I'm holding this pencil right now. I'm on a Zoom call with you. These seem to be like, okay, my senses aren't, this isn't like a mirage where I put a stick in the water and it looks like it's bent, but that's just because of, mirage or illusions. Surely there are some times where our senses are reliable. And Descartes will continue and say, but I cannot forget that at other times I have been deceived in sleep by similar illusions. And attentively considering those cases, I perceive so clearly that there exist no certain marks by which the state of waking can ever be distinguished from sleep, that I feel greatly astonished, and in amazement I almost persuade myself that I am now dreaming. Let us suppose then that we are dreaming. So now he's saying, okay, even that example of, oh, I'm holding my pencil, these are very clear. He's saying, well, what if there is this possibility that I'm dreaming? So let's just assume we're dreaming. Let us suppose then that we are dreaming and that all these particulars, namely the opening of the eyes, the motion of the head, the forth putting of the hands, are merely illusions. And even that we really possess neither an entire body nor hands such as we see. Whether I am awake or dreaming, it remains true that 2 and 3 make 5, and that a square has but 4 sides. Nor does it seem possible that truths so apparent can ever fall under a suspicion of falsity or incertitude. So now he's saying, well, even if I'm dreaming, a square has 4 sides. That's not, so surely this must be a foundation we can build on, these mathematical facts or mathematical axioms. 2 + 3 = 5, a square has 4 sides, a triangle has 3 sides, and so forth. So now he's going to look for, is there any way that he could be deceived about this? Could he be wrong about this? And he says, I will suppose then, not that deity, who is sovereignly good and the fountain of truth, but that some malignant demon who is at once exceedingly potent and deceitful, has employed all his artifice to deceive me. So he's saying, a square doesn't have 4 sides. What if there's an evil demon, an evil genius who is just trying to make me believe that a square has 4 sides or a triangle has 3 sides or 2 + 3 = 5 when it's actually not the case. So I'll continue resolutely fixed in this belief. And if indeed by this means it be not in my power to arrive at the knowledge of truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is, suspend my judgment and guard with settled purpose against giving my assent to what is false and being imposed upon by this deceiver, whatever be his power and artifice. So he's saying, we're just going to assume there's an evil genius who is making me think that 2 + 3 = 5, or making me think that a square has 4 sides. But again, this is his radical Cartesian doubt. Is there any way that we could doubt this? And then he says, I will nevertheless make an effort and try anew the same path on which I had entered yesterday, that is, proceed by casting aside all that admits of the slightest doubt, not less than if I had discovered it to be absolutely false. And I will continue always in this track until I shall find something that is certain, or at least, if I can do nothing more, until I shall know with certainty that there is nothing certain. Archimedes, that he might transport the entire globe from the place it occupied to another, demanded only a point that was firm and immovable. So also I shall be entitled to entertain the highest expectations if I am fortunate enough to discover only one thing that is certain and indubitable. And I suppose accordingly that all the things which I see are false. I believe that none of those objects which my fallacious memory represents ever existed. I suppose that I possess no senses. I believe that body, figure, extension, motion, and place are merely fictions of my mind. What is there then that can be esteemed true? Perhaps this only, that there is absolutely nothing certain. So he's okay with this. What if there's nothing certain? Let's see if that is the case. And he says, but I before denied that I possessed senses or a body. I hesitate, however, for what follows from that. Am I so dependent on the body and the senses that without these I cannot exist? But I had the persuasion that there was absolutely nothing in the world, that there was no sky and no earth, neither minds nor bodies. So again, this is his radical doubt. He's saying, okay, I don't have a body. My senses can deceive me. Math could be, I could just be deceived by some evil genius. So he can doubt everything. There's no sky, there's no earth, there's nothing. But I had the persuasion that there was absolutely nothing in the world, that there was no sky and no earth, neither minds nor bodies. Was I not therefore at the same time persuaded that I did not exist? Okay, and wait for it. And he says, far from it, I assuredly existed, since I was persuaded. But there is, I know not what being, who is possessed at once of the highest power and the deepest cunning, who is constantly employing all his ingenuity in deceiving me. So he's saying, even if there's this evil genius, doubtless then I exist. So even if this evil genius is deceiving me, making me think 2 + 3 = 5, I still exist, since I am deceived. And let him deceive me as he may, he can never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I shall be conscious that I am something. So that it must, in fine, be maintained, all things being maturely and carefully considered, that this proposition, I exist, is necessarily true each time it is expressed by me or conceived in my mind. So that's his indubitable claim, that he exists. At any time he says it, anytime he can think that, he exists, or anytime he thinks, he must exist. But what then am I? A thinking thing, it has been said, but what is a thinking thing? It is a thing that doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, that imagines also and perceives. But in conclusion, I find I have insensibly reverted to the point I desired. For since it is now manifest to me that bodies themselves are not properly perceived by the senses, nor by the faculty of imagination, but by the intellect alone, and since they are not perceived because they are seen and touched, but only because they are understood, or rightly,
That's okay.
Where was it? Okay.
We'll find it.
Rightly comprehended by thought, I readily discover that there is nothing more easily or clearly apprehended than by my own, that's being hidden from me. Okay, and so that is from Meditations, and now here is from Discourse on Method, and his argument is, like, this is what he's most famous for, this Cogito argument, and it's from both these works, Discourse on Method and Meditations on First Philosophy. Discourse on Method is where he says that phrase, I think, therefore I am, but we just went through Meditations, and that was his argument. So here's his Discourse on Method. He has these 4 rules. So his 4 rules for how he's going to get to indubitable truth. The first was never to accept anything for true which I did not clearly know to be such, that is to say, carefully to avoid precipitancy and prejudice, and to comprise nothing more in my judgment than what was presented to my mind so clearly and distinctly as to exclude all ground of doubt. The second, to divide each of the difficulties under examination into as many parts as possible, and as might be necessary for its adequate solution. The third, to conduct my thoughts in such order that by commencing with objects the simplest and easiest to know, I might ascend by little and little, and as it were step by step to the knowledge of the more complex, assigning in thought a certain order even to those objects which in their own nature do not stand in a relation of antecedence and sequence. And the last, in every case, to make enumerations so complete and reviews so general that I might be assured that nothing was omitted. So it's really this first one that the cogito argument is based on, that I'm not going to accept anything except for whatever I can conclude with no doubt, to exclude all doubt. Okay, and so here is, again, from Discourse on Method, and here he's kind of going to summarize his whole process. So this should feel like a review of what we just went through. So I thought that I ought to reject as absolutely false all opinions in regard to which I could suppose the least ground for doubt, in order to ascertain whether after that there remained aught in my belief that was wholly indubitable. Accordingly, seeing that our senses sometimes deceive us, I was willing to suppose that there existed nothing really such as they presented to us. And because some men err in reasoning and fall into paralogisms, even on the simplest matters of geometry, I, convinced that I was as open to error as any other, rejected as false all the reasonings I had hitherto taken for demonstrations. And finally, when I considered that the very same thoughts which we experience when awake may also be experienced when we are asleep, while there is at that time not one of them true, I suppose that all the objects that had ever entered into my mind when awake had in them no more truth than the illusions of my dreams. But immediately upon this, I observed that whilst I thus wished to think that all was false, so he didn't talk about the evil genius there, which we get, he does talk about it in Discourse on Method, but we just read through it in Meditations. It was absolutely necessary that I, who thus thought, should be somewhat, and as I observed that this truth, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, was so certain and of such evidence that no ground of doubt, however extravagant, could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it, I concluded that I might, without scruple, accept it as the first principle of the philosophy of which I was in search. Okay, so now we're really getting to, here's the summary of it. So he wants to doubt everything. And so we'll start with a lot of his knowledge is based on his senses. We should trust our senses. And he says, well, but our senses can deceive us. Okay, well then let's only trust clear and distinct senses. And do you remember why he, how he can doubt clear and distinct sensations? I'll give you the answer. We could be dreaming, or we could be insane. So then he goes to, well, at least can we trust simple math? 2 + 3 = 5. A square has 4 sides. And here we could be deceived by an evil genius. And finally, trust that if I am thinking, I exist. It's just this one claim. And this finally is indubitable. This is finally a claim. So it ends with, summarize Descartes' argument that ends with the claim, I think, therefore I am. This is it. And we get to this final claim, I think, therefore I am, that is beyond doubt. There's no way, even if an evil genius, even if he's asleep, even if his senses are deceiving him, if he is thinking, he must exist. He can't think without existing. Okay. So that is Descartes' argument. that ends with the claim, I think, therefore I am, or that is Descartes' cogito argument.